your source for everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron on the Para-X Radio Network. And now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to the last show of 2023. My guest tonight is Mark Stavish, and he's going to introduce us to the magical world of Dr. Lisiewski. Dr. Joseph Lisiewski, I can't say it. Sorry, Mark. Mark, is a respected authority in the study of practice of Western spiritual traditions. He's the founder of the Institute for Hermetic Studies and the author of several books, including The Path of Alchemy, Kabbalah for Health and Wellness, and Egregores. And if anybody in the chat room listening in live has any questions or comments for Mark, and you're not in the Para-X chat room, please join us at paraxradionetwork.com. And Mark, nice to have you back again. It's been a few years, actually.
You know, it's wonderful to be back. And as we joked, the last time I was here, I was in my attic in my Scooby-Doo pajamas when we did the interview, and this time I'm in a different location, and I'm in a basement, but a nice basement. Just I was in a nice attic, so it's but no pajamas.
It's not moving on up, but moving on down isn't too bad either, huh? No,
it's nicely walled and paneled and looks good. I have a study, not a man cave.
Okay, that's good, but it goes both ways. Everybody says, well, it's not a man cave, but, sometimes it is.
Sometimes. I need a pinball machine for that.
Well, they're a dime a dozen. No, not really. Not anymore, for sure. All right. I think we need to start with the burning question. Who is Dr. Lisiewski? Oh, my God.
I'll get it for you. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
The name is spelled Lisiewski, but he would call it Lisiewski, a soft F kind of on the W. So don't worry about the pronunciation or mispronunciation of it.
I had it so good when I was practicing before, and then all of a sudden it went boink. That wasn't good. But anyway, so why should we be introduced to him? And as we talked the other day, why does it matter?
Well, I think Joe's a good friend of mine, and I worked with him on several of his books. His breakout book, the one that really put him on the map in the early 2000s, was Ceremonial Magic and the Power of Evocation. And it's about just that, ceremonial magic in the traditional medieval style. And he came from a school of thought that said, you do the magical text, and this would be the Solomonic magical text, which is the Key of Solomon, greater or lesser key, the Arbitel, and these things. And you would do them exactly as they were written. You wouldn't add or detract from it. You would not make changes of convenience. Because what we saw in a lot of the magical schools at that time was the idea that, well, I don't really like that deity, so I'm going to change the names in the outer circle. Or I don't really like that one, I'm going to do this. Or his favorite one was the evocations, that is the calling of the spirit to the edge of the circle, or into the triangle of heart, or the moon. The text would say is to be done to visible appearance, meaning that it's to be visible before you. Not just an idea or vague notion, but a tangible visitation. You have called, the FTD 4 guy has arrived. Put in your order, and Domino's has delivered. In this case, you did the ritual, and the spirit has appeared. And that to not have the spirit appear would be considered a failure in the operation. Now, this, of course, caused quite a stir among the OTO and Golden Dawn folks, of which he was well known, and among others as well. But that's where it gets interesting, because he was a very close student of Frater Albertus. And Frater Albertus, as many of your listeners probably know, is the reason we have, in many ways, the study of alchemy in the United States in the 20th century. Albertus was a member of the Rosicrucian Order Amorc in the 40s. He started his school for alchemy in the 60s. It went to the 80s into his death. And of course, then later on we see the Philosophers of Nature. But Albertus was a seminal figure. He also knew, he was close friends with Dr. Regardie. And between these two, these were his principal mentors. So he had some incredibly great mentorship in his magical and alchemical. That's why we should be interested.
Okay. One thing, I'm hearing a lot of buzzing on your end. Are you using a headset or what?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Make sure your mouth is close to the mic, because it was fading. It was fading in and out. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you tell me if I'm fine right now.
Right now, you're fine.
Perfect.
All right. I should give you a safe word, in case it goes off. Yeah, we should do that. Okay, so this book that you wrote about him is a book about demons, both the kind that can be summoned inside the ceremonial triangles and mirrors and crystal balls, but the kind of buried deep inside the dungeons of our minds as well. And I'm quoting from the book, because it's also about evoking them to appearance and manifestation so that we can know them, name them, make them serve us or exorcise them from our lives. And it says, regardless of what you believe, demons are real. And so is our self-creative salvation from them. Now, the book is about struggle and redemption. And this is his story as told by you. And it's complicated, but not complicated. But one thing I think, a word that is used a lot in the book is occultism. And I think that some people may not be familiar with the term. So can you just explain that?
Well, we would say occultism is anything that which is hidden. And for us, that refers to mostly practices and methodologies designed to give us a peek behind the curtain of materiality. So when we look at occultism, at least the way it was generally thrown around in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we're looking at things like tarot. Tarot is occultism because it's a fortune telling. It's a way of getting a peek behind the curtain of reality. Astrology is occultism. So ritual magic is. I think within the book, when we look at it, we're looking specifically at methodologies or techniques more so than a philosophical view. Because there are many techniques of occultism or tools, and that's what we're really looking at there in the book.
Okay. It's a word that people always uses, and we always hear it, but we just don't have that definition. And so it's always like, well, I think I know what that means, but, it's better to talk about it. Okay, so for the doctor, I'm going to call him the doctor.
Sure, a lot of people do, by the way.
Good, not can be, it won't be Doctor Who, but, close enough.
Yeah.
But for him...
Well, he was fascinated by time travel, so it's fitting.
Okay. But for him, magic and alchemy were about one thing, and that's practical results. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, this goes back to the notion of visible appearance. And when we look at occultism today, we look at esotericism, spiritual practices, we see that, and Regardie, of course, was a part of this. Remember, he knew Israel Regardie, and Regardie was a therapist That's how he made his living in many ways. And he talked about magic, particularly that of the Golden Dawn, in therapeutic terms, in terms of modern psychology. He wasn't the first to do it, but of course he's among the most well-known. So we look at that period in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s, where magical practices are looked at as a form of, in some ways, psychotherapy. They're looked at as a way of engaging with aspects of our unconscious, and of course, which they are, but this heavy emphasis on psychology, and a psychologizing, is a term you often hear today, of esotericism, in many ways separated it from its original roots. And its original roots were a means of impacting the physical world. A way of having some control as an actor, as a cause, to create desirable effects, tangible effects in the physical domain. And we were able to get away from that in the 20th century because of, essentially, wealth. It didn't really matter as much if we could magically cure something because we had modern medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with alchemy. Alchemy was very much concerned with transmutation, but as an example or a proof, if you will, of one's inner attainment. Because it's very easy to make claims to profound spiritual realizations or levels of initiation, if you want to call them that. However, how does one test that?
Mm-hmm.
And alchemy is one of the few areas where you could say, where's the proof?
Yeah, and alchemy is also something that people don't always know what it means. I mean, I think a lot of people, and this is going to sound silly, but it's not, people heard probably sometimes the word alchemy when the Harry Potter movies started coming out. They were talking about alchemy, and I forget his name, the guy that they were talking about, but that was, something that people knew about then, and they had never heard the word, in mainstream people. Go ahead. What?
Well, that's true. And the original title of the Harry Potter books was not the Sorcerer's Stone,
Philosophers. Yeah.
And the alchemist that was mentioned in the first book was Nicholas Flamel.
There you go. Yeah. So, it's funny how kind of mainstream kind of blends in every so often in different things. And basically it's out of movies and TV and stuff. And sometimes they're right. And sometimes they just make a big mess out of it all. But
well, and that's really a wonderful topic for another talk is what is the role of media in occulture, or the culture of occultism in popular culture.
Give me just one thing. What do you think is how often that they do their homework and get it right?
I don't know. I've seen maybe it's in the single digits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so people get the wrong idea, but, it's nice that people remember Nicholas Flamel, the name and alchemy and stuff. So let's talk about the way you met the doctor.
That was quite fascinating. I had heard of him prior to meeting him because he was known. Of course, I was in the French-American organization, the Philosophers of Nature. Many of the folks in that were part of Albertus' school in the 70s and early 80s. So I would hear these stories, and it turned out they were stories about Lisiewski and people who knew him. And he was not at these events, but some of the stories were quite funny, so you'd occasionally hear them getting repeated. And with that, in the 1990s, late 90s, I get an email, and it's from Joe. And we exchange a few emails back and forth. It never really goes anywhere because my computer crashes. So by the time I get back up and running, this is something in the past. We never wake up again until years later. But between then, this is really very important. I get an email from a fellow who would like to meet with me. He'd like some instruction or assistance for performing an extended magical retreat. And he's a chaplain, Swiss Army, and we have an extended talk. And he tells me, I have some experience in my youth. He tells me where he's from. So I write some things up for him, and off it goes. A few years later, a copy of one of Joe's books comes to me, and I read it, and I look at where he's mention of it, where he's from. I contact someone else who knew him and said, is this guy for real, and would he be worth talking to? And a very good source, he says, yes, he's for real, worth talking to. And in that book, The Power of Magic and Ceremonial Evocation, he talks about the first two evocations he did with his childhood friend, Oakmont, Schuylkill County, which is a whole country. That was the fellow who came to me. So I met his friend. I met the fellow he did those rituals with before I met him. And I heard many of the stories about him before I met him. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been believable. Right? And we started exchanging emails. And then he called me one Sunday night. I remember I was in my kitchen. It was a nice night. I was on the phone. We chatted for a few hours. Talked about some people we knew, some in common, and others just, telling old war stories, which were fascinating. And it just became kind of a regular event. And at some point, I'm helping him with some of his projects. He's writing some endorsements for some of mine. And we probably spoke every day for quite a while, for several years. And that's what prompted me to write the memoir of him, because people I noticed, courtesy of the internet, had some really mistaken ideas about him. Some people didn't even believe he existed. Mm. They thought he was someone else. I said, no, didn't you read the introduction I did to his book? No. And you know how those ideas gain traction once they start. They're hard to squash. Mm-hmm. Silly things. So that's it. That's how we met, and that's how it took off.
Mm. Okay, you're fading in and out again. So.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
That's just how it took off. We did.
Okay. Now, so I read that the most important magical ritual of his life, the doctor's life, took place on New Year's Eve in 1966 when he was 17 years old. Tell the story?
Yeah, that's a spectacular one, because he wrote in a letter to Regardie several years later about that ritual. Regardie recognized it as somewhat of extreme talent. The nature of the ritual was an evocation of a spirit. Now, he was going off of the text that was the corrupted version of the Heptameron of Peter Romano. And I later found out that that corrupted version which he used was the so-called De Lawrence Book of Secrets of Hindu Magic. And you have to understand, and I think the listeners may not grasp it, that there was not a lot available to folks at this time. Whatever books you could get, you held on to, studied them dearly. Whatever organizations you could get in touch with, there weren't too many you got in touch with. And, he just did this ritual. And as his friend had mentioned to me, remember, earlier, friend had told me the same thing earlier. It was a terrifying experience.
Mm.
That the walls shook. It was just this constant roaring of noise, as he describes. There was just the overwhelming terror that gripped them as they realized that this worked. They had called on something, and something showed up.
Mm.
You would ask yourself, okay, well, why would anyone do this? Well, this is coal country. This is dying coal country. People don't grasp, just what that means. You're talking about a generation of teenagers who looked at a future that involved either anthracite mining, what was left of it, getting drafted and going to Vietnam. Their fathers, uncles, family members were most likely World War II or Korean-era combat veterans. There was a lot of drinking. Working in the mines was terrible. And it was just terrible work. Had to be done. It's what fueled the Industrial Revolution. It's what fueled our victories in World War I and World War II. But it was hard and physically debilitating. So you look at a young guy getting out of high school with no real prospects for how to pay for college, college draft requirements. Mm-hmm. And he's got to find a way to get into school and pay for it. And that's pretty much why they did it.
Hmm. I know a couple of people that started out with ceremonial magic and then, went on to different aspects and stuff. I think, and there were teenage boys when they were doing it. I think that's what the gate opens up for some people, some teenagers, and then just kind of go find the path that fits after that. And sometimes they stay there. You just never know. Let me see this. We're going to have to take a break in a couple of minutes because the first half hour just went by really, really quick. He passed away when?
I have to check. We're going on, I think, 7 years, I think. I have to check the dates.
Well, it's okay. I mean, I didn't know how soon it was or how, whatever. But so what would you consider his legacy being if you had to check something?
I think his legacy was encouraging people to focus on tangible results. This is really very important because it's so easy to delude ourselves when we're undertaking any type of spiritual practice. I think a perfect example of that is, the book The Secret. I know many people who got themselves into terrible situations with that because, they were, the universe is a catalog. I can just order whatever I want from it. And then they'd get themselves in some kind of terrible financial situation. But they're hoping and wishing and praying away, but it's just not happening. So why is it that doesn't happen? Or why is it that it does? And looking at magic in a traditional sense also was part of his legacy, because the psychologizing of it, which was very important, I would say that it is important, is not the whole story, and it's just part of it. So what you see is this belief that we can kind of pick these things apart and recombine them any way we want them to. And we see that in the ultimate problem with the so-called solo practitioner and self-educated magical types, wherein they don't really have a good background, they don't really have a good training, and they get themselves in deeper. So I think those all are part of the same legacy that he leaves us.
How many books did he write?
I know he wrote 3 novels. Maybe a 4th. Only one of them was really good. That was The Altar Path. I really liked that. The rest are a bit on the high crazy side. And then nonfiction works. 1, 2, 3, I think 3 or 4. And of course, I really encourage everyone to read his book, Israel Regardie and the Philosopher's Stone. Many people don't realize that Israel Regardie, who is attributed with being the reason the Golden Dawn is so widely known, not only in popular culture, but in the wider esoteric culture, was also a practicing alchemist. And he studied with Frater Albertus and was very skilled in alchemy.
Were you, when you got to be friends, were you kind of like a student as well as a friend? Were you picking up things from him and opening your...
I think with us it was really very mutual because we would do experiments and compare. And he had some very interesting insights that I thought were quite fascinating. But it really worked kind of both ways. He didn't... he was working alone at that point, and a lot of his work was based on his own scientific research with regards to time travel. This was a big point of his, a big fascination. But on the magical end, it was which practices work the best. And he even started moving more into a non-ceremonial approach at certain points. And we talked about that, the strengths and weaknesses of that as well. What your listeners might refer to more commonly as kind of new thought. What are its strengths and weaknesses?
I think people, and maybe you too, when we start in this area, we start at a beginning, at a kindergarten thing, but sometimes people don't graduate into other things. They are only got the blinders on for one thing only. Other paths are not interested in, and I think it's good that people kind of keep an open mind and kind of explore everything until you really are sure what you're going to do, where you're going to go with it.
Well, and with that said, what is the foundation of all of it? And understanding the nature of your own mind is really the foundation of all of this. So when we look at that, whether it's in ceremonial magic or whether it's in new thought or these meditative practices, do I understand my own mind? Do I understand myself? Because when you're in a ceremonial situation, particularly as he was, the young man with his friend, and all of this phenomena is happening around him, the question arises, is it actually happening on the exterior of the circle? That is, would someone walk into the room and have the same experience? Or is somehow all of it just in our minds? That is, if someone walked into that room, would they wonder what's going on? Why are you cowering in the center of this chalk circle, clutching each other, wondering, what's going on, crying out for help? Why? And that being said, that's where the notion of tangible results comes. And how do you know that? So if you're in that circle, how do you know, even if it is actually happening on the outside, the nature of your own mind decides how you're going to respond to it. And if you respond well, then you don't have a problem. If you respond poorly, then you've got some serious problems.
Sometimes people have blinders, but not even blinders. They have walls, and some are tall walls and some are shorter walls, and things can crawl under the door kind of walls, But it's all about trusting ourselves and knowing that what we think in our heads is right for us, or, we don't have to second guess. We just have to know what it is and go with it, right?
Well, I think that's in terms of when you're picking your path. And once on that path, though, you have to learn discernment. And discernment is really the first virtue. Otherwise, if you don't learn it, you're just going to make your life worse. And many people do that. We see them they're not very discerning. And discernment is an easy way of understanding what's important from what isn't, and cause and effect. Many people don't understand that relationship of if this, then that. That everything in life is an if-then statement. That's karma. If, then, action, result.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take a break, and everybody stay put. We will be back in about 2 minutes.
Great.
There's more Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks right after these important messages.
Hi, it's Tori DeVito. In every family, small conversations can make a big impact, like when my dad shared his experiences as an alcoholic.
Your honesty about that part of your life gave me a sense of integrity that I wanted to uphold in my own life.
I wanted you to know, from someone who's been in recovery more than 30 years now, that hard work is what creates success, not alcohol or other drugs. I said it a lot, and I'm glad you took it to heart.
Talk, they hear you. For more information, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
Demons, vampires, werewolves, skinwalkers. All of this and more. Sunday nights at midnight on the Staring Into the Abyss radio show. Come, get lost with us.
Hi, this is Marla Brooks from Stirring the Cauldron. One of the best gifts that you can give yourself or to someone else on your Christmas list this holiday season is the gift of insight. And if your crystal ball is a bit murky, think about giving them or yourself a personalized yearly Witch's Oracle deck reading. This comprehensive reading gives you a heads up on what the universe has in store for you in the coming year, and the month-to-month guide offers you a chance to make necessary changes if need be before situations get out of hand, or give you a hint of something really good to look forward to. So if you want to treat yourself or someone else, pop over to marlabrooks.com, click on the More tab on the homepage menu, and then click on Readings to find out more. And have a very happy holiday season, and blessed be.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And we're back, and my guest is Mark Stavish, and he's here to talk about his book, The Magical World of Dr. Joseph Lisiewski. I'm getting better.
Getting better.
I'm getting closer. I've got a question from the chat room, so let's get that out. She was wondering about your thoughts on Dion Fortune's novels and her methods of magic outside the GD.
Well, it doesn't appear that her methods of magic really were outside of the GD. That's where she studied and trained, and the methods of her order reflect that. I think that the novels are worth reading. They're a bit on the maybe slow side for today, for the modern reader. But if you're willing to take some time to read them, there's a tremendous amount of information in there. It's not always clearly laid out, though, but it is there. And one thing that Dion Fortune did was spent a tremendous amount of time in what we would call rising on the plains, a kind of astral journey. And I remember reading some of the uncirculated, unpublished papers decades ago from her that someone had given me. And they were interesting to read. It's not always clear how much of that is a subjective experience, that is something like a lucid dream, and how much of it would say is an objective experience. An objective experience, more like an astral projection that would qualify like on a remote viewing, where you're in a verifiable alternate dimension rather than just an alternate state of mind. So I think Dion Fortune is worth spending time.
Okay. Now, the doctor knew too well that occultism could easily be an escape and the search for a magic bullet, as you say, that solves all of our problems. Talk about that. Talk about the magic bullet.
One of the biggest problems we have today is that people enter into spiritual practices, regardless of what they are, devoid of the context. Or maybe not. Maybe it's the modern context is what they've got, but it's often cut away from a traditional context. So that's why we see so many different systems, and people often join so many different groups in an effort to piece together these different parts of the puzzle. What's really important, though, is that one not turn to magic, the spell of the week book or the spell of the month book, and simply try to manipulate energies. What you have to do is you have to say, I have come to esotericism because I do not like my life. I want to change it. I want it to be better in some ways. And once you start with that and you go with that and you're okay with that, then you're going to do things that are more important and more geared towards you understanding yourself and changing your attitude towards yourself and others and the situations around you. Because then at that point, when you engage in ritual work, it will help assist you rather than simply amplify the degree of stupid that you've already poured into things. And then that's really important to understand. Ritual amplifies the quality and quantity of the experience. And if you're bringing to it a lot of just anger, frustration, self-pity, resentment, and all sorts of things, then that's going to get amplified. And that's why when you go into magic, people's lives often fall apart.
Yeah.
And they fall apart hard. Now, this is why Regardie said that before you do any occult work, ritual work like in the Golden Dawn, you should have a couple of years of therapy under your belt. And I really believe that's true. But that's hard to find.
Yeah.
Now, if you can't do a couple of years of therapy under your belt, try maybe, 2 or 3 years of some kind of 12-step group that's closest to your addiction. And your addiction is going to be your pathology of choice. You know, it may not be drugs or alcohol or sex or shopping or overeating, but it may be something else that you can begin to identify with. And then as you work through that, then you're going to find that your magical operations are going to be more efficient for you and effective because you're going to be able to get out of your own way. You're going to have an inner calm. Maybe not perfect, but at least a greater one than you had before you started.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's the other thing that jumped up at me too. The doctor sought not only to turn people toward tradition, he actively wanted to destroy the New Age movement. Let's talk about that.
Oh, well, that was part of his time travel fantasy, as I call it. And the reason being is, I mean, I've seen so much of it too. You know, we talk about the Spell of the Month book, but I mean, a lot of people have been seriously damaged by the occulture movement and the pop culture of spirituality. Now, we don't see that often because we don't want to. But as someone who was a therapist for many years and still gets private clients specifically along this area, people go into spirituality with, eyes wide shut. You know, I mean, they're open, but they can't see what's going on because they have a vision of what they want to see, what they want to be. And that naivete, at best, naivete, utter foolishness at worst, will be used against them. And it's used against them both by, we'll call actual active predatory types within cults and different movements. It is used against them by the marketing departments. Look, I've published with all the major publishers, and nobody ever asks, does this stuff work?
Okay, they just want to make sure they sell a lot and it doesn't matter, right?
Well, some of them have a good sense of credibility, or at least a sense that they believe, but they ask you, how many copies can you sell?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you right now, and that's not their fault. They're in the business to publish books and to stay afloat and make money.
Sure.
And that's another story altogether. If students really want not to be taken advantage of, then they need to build infrastructure and tradition. Okay, you need to do that, and that's going to take work and effort and sacrifice. But that's another lecture for another time. If you go into this, with this idea that, I'm going to buy this book and it's going to fix my life. No, it's not. And in fact, one of the things is you have to tear things down before you can build them back up. And that's almost never talked about in most of the literature because it's not a good sell.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is the natural cause and effect happens. People invest 5, 7, 8, 10 years into this. They probably haven't gotten what they want, and then they turn it into a political action committee or a social movement. And that's what we saw really starting around, it really starts with Starhawk, but really takes traction by the mid-2000s, and it really takes off by 2016. So that's where we see contemporary neo-paganism, magical groups really moving hard into political and social ideas and action, which is not the purpose of those groups. Those groups are to help you. The notion of those inner teachings is inner awakening and inner initiation, not outer action. So you begin to see how things can quickly fall apart if you don't really know why you're there.
Mm-hmm. I've got another question from the chat room. It's a very long one. So
go ahead.
Let me go for it. Okay. He said the doctor strongly recommended the ritual magic manual. The invocations in it are more complex than I've seen in other Golden Dawn books. I have worked through all the elemental, planetary, and zodiacal invocations, as well as most of the supremes, several times each. I have found them to be powerful. Are you familiar with these rituals, and do you find them vastly different from the others, such as opening of the watchtowers or invocations that aren't as elaborate?
The book is not in arm's reach to me, so I have to look at that in particular. But let me say this. The critical part for that book, because I remember when he wrote it, and is that the practitioner really has to engage in understanding and absorbing and creating what he called a subconscious synthesis of the ideas and the symbols being used. That you weren't to simply stand up and draw a pentagram and chant these names and do this visualization without really attempting to understand exactly what you were doing and why you were doing it. And this is really important because that's a very traditional way of doing things being applied to that heavy visualization magic of the Golden Dawn. The rituals that are in that book, the ritual ideas and the prayers and the suggestions, were also meant to be memorized. Now, that doesn't mean everyone would memorize them fully and completely, but you were to memorize it as much as possible so that this would flow. The other part about the lengthiness is that by having the hyper-elaboration, you're layering upon layering the nature of the ritual. So I can think of other practices that are similar in that regard, where there's lengthy recitations about the qualities of deities that you're talking about, and the qualities of the forces you're seeking to have a deeper realization of. So that book in particular, I really recommend it to anyone. His writing style can be a little difficult to get through at times, but if you just really take your time and take some careful notes and follow his instructions, you'll find that your ritual work is just going to improve dramatically.
Okay. I'm trying to read something that I wrote that I can't read it now. It got chicken scratching. But it starts out by saying that the doctor was a very divisive. Oh my God, I can't even.
Divisive.
Thank you.
Is the.
I scribbled it down, and oh boy, but that he was very much that, and very good at, and this is the word I can't figure out. Something with solve, but not consistently good at coagula. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, he was really good at solve.
Okay.
Well, he was born in Aries. I mean, he was really good at hitting the beach. You know? Everything was a battle to him, and he was hyper analytical in that very combative way. I mean, his undergraduate work was in engineering, which is physics and mathematics, very competitive. His graduate work was in physics, and again, very competitive. So it's always about who's got the smaller piece of chalk at the end of the blackboard, who's written the most formula. Kind of the inverse of the magical wet towel contest. It's just highly competitive. And that was his point. He wanted to shake things up. That was his goal, and he did a great job of it. I think the downside of that is that too many easily influenced youngsters. You have to understand that the books on ritual magic today, for the most part, unless we're dealing with the gourmet talismanic publishing industry with limited edition publications, most of the popular books on magic are really written for a 15 to 20-year-old audience.
Mm-hmm.
Now that really needs to sink in. They're written for kids, which is unfortunate. But that shows in the cover art, that shows in the language. It shows in even the style of approach. So you would have these young guys who really weren't used to having. Remember the time frame here, early 2000s into the 2010s. We see this now with the utter destruction of many aspects of masculinity in young men under 30, under 35 even in this country. You see these young guys, seeing this guy who's not afraid to speak his mind, who's not afraid, and he's adamant, he's firm, he has confidence, even if he is at times loud and vulgar and somewhat abusive. This was a change. This is a dramatic change for many, and unfortunately, that attraction often results in kind of a poor imitation. Not like you saw a lot of folks with Crowley. A lot of Crowleyites all these decades later. They're poor imitations of the grand old man. And we saw that with Lisiewski, poor imitations coming out too.
I think I like people like that, because they make other people think. I mean, yeah.
That was his purpose, really. I'll tell you right now, as much as he wanted to show you that he was the sharpest, pencil in the box, his purpose really was to push you to think. He really did. And this is what's hard for people to understand, because his writing style could be so abrasive. He really did care about people.
Mm-hmm.
He really, I'm telling you, someone who spent more time with him probably than anyone other than his wife, in those years. He really did care about people and wanted them to succeed and wanted them to do well.
And opening up people's minds is a good favor, for sure.
And he just used a sledgehammer and a crowbar.
Well, butterflies and lollipops don't always work,
Yeah, he'd agree with that.
Sometimes you need to be, a little different from other people to get your attention and make what they need to do work, I think.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. His students loved him. I heard people complain about him, but you know what? never heard one of his students complain about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
that needs to be said, because he had students, charged them a lot, they kept coming back for more, and I've never heard any one of them say, this guy was a scoundrel, this guy was a con man. You could say a lot of things about him,
mm-hmm.
but you can't say that, one, he didn't care, and two, that his students didn't find value in what he was teaching them.
Well, he spoke his truth. I mean, and maybe in a harsh way, but it got attention and it worked.
And that he said that often.
Yeah, it's true. So the book is available at Amazon, right? And
yes.
Other places all over the place. And so in the last few minutes that we have like 6 minutes. I want you to talk about the Institute for Hermetic Studies. What's going on there lately, and what is it for people that may not know?
Well, the Institute for Hermetic Studies is an organization I started 25 years ago. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary in June of this year. And, of course, we're moving forward for another 25 years. And we offer courses on traditional esotericism, various aspects of it. We have them online. Currently, we're using Teachable as our platform, but we are going to be migrating away from that in 2024. The new website and platform isn't up yet. We will be migrating. But until then, which is quite a few months off, there's quite a bit of really good material there that covers the entirety of the esoteric path, the spiritual path. And it's important because most schools don't. And I mean that seriously. They really don't. That's how this was set up, is to give you the tools to know what are the different stages of the path, how to recognize them. And not just in this group, in Hermetic group, so to speak, but you then can see that in other systems as well. So particularly if your students just want to do one thing, just do one thing. Take our free online course, Unfolding the Rose. Just that. And you will see that everything in there will be applicable to whatever you do, regardless of your esoteric orientation. Because it helps you create a solid, structured framework within the classical sense and in the traditional sense for spirituality in all of its phases. So you know where you're going. Like I tell you, when you take a spiritual teaching, you should at least ask 3 questions. Where did this come from? How is it done? And what can I expect? Just 3 things like that. Yeah, simple. And the teacher or instructor should be able to answer that for you. So we give that. We also have an annual conference. Most, but not all, unfortunately, of our conferences are available on Teachable. Some were not recorded, our earliest ones. We don't have those, but we have others. We have some very good Conversations from the Edge, which is a very irregular podcast, for lack of a better term, that we do, where we do interviews with various teachers, people that we've known that have something very interesting to say. You can find those on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and we also have them homed over at Teachable. So we have a regular monthly blog that we post. It's usually a very lengthy essay on something of importance, and that's Vox Hermes. You can find that at WordPress. Again, if you go to Teachable and subscribe and agree to get emails from us, we send you notifications when that comes out. So we've got a lot going on, and we have, of course, about 28 or so books in publication. Many of them are the manuals that are used before the courses, so you can either read the PDF online if you subscribe to a course, or you can purchase at a very nominal cost the book that goes with it or books that go with it. And we have volunteers who have been translating several of those over the years. So some of our more important items are available in German, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. That's amazing. So what is the YouTube channel? Where do they go to?
Institute for Hermetic Studies. Now, unfortunately, we do have 2 Institute for Hermetic Studies channels. One of them was set up probably 10 or more years ago. It was vandalized, so there's some partial videos there from our coursework, which is great because you can get a free taste of it, but it's not the whole course. It's not the whole courses, but you can get pieces of it. That is not the one to go to for some of our better stuff. Our better one is, you'll find that it has our logo on it. It says Institute for Hermetic Studies. It'll have things like Conversations from the Edge and interviews that we've done with authors, those types of things. And for your students who are particularly interested in witchcraft in America, I have a wonderful interview conversation that I did with Christopher Regardie, who is the author of the book The Red Church, a book on German folk magic. And we discussed, among all things, Frederick Santee and Sybil Leek. And of course, Sybil Leek is the grand old dame of magic in America, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And do you have a website to give out as well, so people can pop over there too?
Of course, you can just Google us, Institute for Hermetic Studies, and hermeticinstitute.org will pop up. Of course, we're not doing anything to update that site because we're going to be migrating away from all of that into a new site in 2024. So there's a lot of interesting stuff on there, a lot of articles and essays from time gone by, because we have been around for 25 years. And but the coursework and the more interesting things, I believe you'll find over at Teachable.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for introducing us to the good doctor. And at some point, I'll be able to pronounce his last name perfectly. I'm working on it now. But, it's been a long time since you were here. You've got books galore, and we should talk about some more down the line. So stay in touch.
Oh, it's just wonderful to be back. I'm so glad we could get this in before the end of the year. And, of course, I'm available to you anytime. Just give me a call, let me know, and I'll be glad to come back for you and your listeners.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. And I want to thank the listeners for being with us. Most of you are here all the time, and I really appreciate it. So everybody have a great New Year's. We'll be back next week, and until next time, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Please join us again next week at the same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2024. The Mysterioso March by Kevin MacLeod is licensed through Incompetech.com.